With respect to the general election in Taiwan, using the same subtle and refined approach, the CCP suggested that a presidential election would lead to disaster, a surge in the suicide rate, collapsing stock markets, an increase in so-called weird diseases, mental disorders, out-migration of the island inhabitants, family feuds, a callous attitude toward life, a depressed market, indiscriminate shooting in the streets, protests and demonstrations, a siege on the presidential building, social unrest, political farce, and so on. The CCP filled the heads of the people in mainland China with these ridiculous ideas on a daily basis in an attempt to lead them to believe that all of these calamities would be the natural result of an election, and therefore that China should never hold democratic elections. In today's Internet era, if you visit the CCP's official Xinhua website or the People's Daily online, you will find indeed that there are quite a few reports that contain negative information about China. Firstly, this is because there is too much bad news circulating rapidly in China these days, and the news agency has to report these stories in order to stay credible. Secondly, the standpoint of such reports conforms with the CCP interests and CCP policy. That is, quote, minor criticism offers great help, unquote. The reports always attribute the cause of bad news to certain individuals, having nothing to do with the party, while crediting party leadership with any solution. The CCP skillfully controls what to report, what not to report, how much to report, and whether to have the Chinese media or the CCP-controlled overseas media report it. The CCP is proficient at manipulating bad news into something that can achieve the desired result of winning people's hearts. Many youth in mainland China feel that the CCP now offers a good degree of freedom of speech, and thus they have hopes for and are appreciative of the CCP. They are the victims of the so-called refined strategies of the iniquitous state-controlled media. Moreover, by creating a chaotic situation in the Chinese society and then giving it some media exposure, the CCP can convince people that only the CCP could control such a chaotic society and can thus manipulate the people into endorsing CCP rule. From live interviews to vivid cultural performances, from touching historical dramas to a great variety of life commentary programs, the CCP's brainwashing propaganda over the past 20 years has become more refined and subtle in cheating. And it is no wonder that so many Chinese have been misled. The CCP's villainous propaganda has been so deceptive that the victims willingly believe in the lies. Even worse, the CCP, which strictly controls media freedom, makes use of overseas and other countries' freedom of speech. It extends its propaganda from mainland China to everywhere around the world, penetrating many aspects of society, from organizations to popular culture and the media. The CCP-controlled CCTV can broadcast in the United States 24 hours a day. The People's Daily can publish in the United States, not only in the Chinese version, but also in English. It can promote CCP policy to overseas Chinese and mainstream Western populations, and in time, carry out its so-called United Front smokescreen strategy. After reading several years of nationalist propaganda on the overseas version of the People's Daily, some older overseas Chinese, who dare not go back to live in China, love the CCP even more than the people in mainland China. Most media sources from outside China are only allowed to broadcast entertainment programs inside mainland China. On one side, the CCP curses democracy and freedom in its own land, and on the other side, it has never stopped taking advantage of other people's democracy and freedom in other countries. The CCP even complains fiercely when other countries restrict airtime for the CCP's unfair propaganda? If the CCP is not a villain, what else could it be? In a democratic nation, sovereignty should lie in the hands of the people, which is in line with the principles of heaven and earth. If a nation claims to be democratic, and yet sovereignty does not rest with its people, it is definitely not on the right track, and can only be regarded as a deviation. And this nation would certainly not be a democratic nation. How could democracy be possible without ending party rule and without a popular election? Return people's rights to the people. The preceding quotation sounds like something that would be written by what the CCP would call its overseas enemies, intent on slamming the CCP. In fact, the statement comes from an article in the Xinhua Daily, the official CCP newspaper, from September 27, 1945. The CCP, which had once trumpeted popular election and demanded a return of people's rights to the people, has treated the right to vote as taboo since it usurped power in 1949. The people, who are supposed to be the masters and owners of the state, have no rights whatsoever to make their own decisions. If you fancy that what's done is done, and that the evil CCP cult that has flourished on murder and has ruled China with lies will reform itself, will become benevolent, and will be willing to return people's rights to them, then you are wrong. Let us hear what the People's Daily, the CCP mouthpiece, had to say on November 23, 2004, 60 years after the public statement mentioned a moment ago. Quote, "A steadfast control of ideology is the essential ideological and political foundation for consolidating the party's rule." Unquote. When renowned CBS correspondent Mike Wallace interviewed Jiang Zemin in the year 2000, he asked Jiang why China had not conducted popular elections. Jiang's response: "The quality of the people in China is very poor." However, as early as February 25, 1939, the CCP cried out in its Xinhua Daily, "The KMT thinks that democratic politics in China are not to be realized today, but some years down the road. They hope that democratic politics will wait until the knowledge and education levels of the Chinese people reach those of the bourgeois democratic countries in Europe and America." The article then continued, "Only under the democratic system will it become easier to educate and train the people." The hypocritical difference between what Xinhua said in 1939 and what Jiang Zemin said in 2000 reflects the true picture of the CCP's sinful nature.